Hello everyone, welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today I'm going to be talking about overlays and image overlays and how you can achieve something like this. So if you notice over here in this image, you'll see that there is this cool sort of transition that happens. Um, Basically, there are two overlays that go from different sides, and then finally you'll see that the image has a little bit of a zooming effect. It scales down while the overlays are passing, which is a pretty cool effect. So without further ado, let's get started. As always, I'm going to Kotus.com, front end, and then Kotus Online Editor. What I need to do here, it's as simple as creating a div with the class container. So I'm just going to div with the class container. I'm just going to increase the font size. And then the next thing is within the div with the class container, I need to add my image. So img src, and then you can choose whatever image you want. In this case, it's very important to know that the image is the height of the image is bigger than its width. So that's an important point to know. So now you can see that your image is over here. And then the next thing I want to add after the image, still within the container, I want to create a class called overlays, div with the class overlays. And then within the overlays, I'm going to add two divs with class overlays. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. So now, as you can see, I have a container. Within the container, I have an image. And then after the image, I have a div with class overlays that includes two overlay div, right? So now going to the CSS section, what I would like to do, I would like to style my container a little bit. Maybe it's better if I switch the layout to this so that you can see what's going on here. So now container, I'm going to give it a width of 400 pixel, and then I'm going to give it a margin of 100 pixel and auto to center it in the page. And then I will make sure that the position is position relative, and then ultimately I set the overflow to be hidden, right? Just like that. The next thing I want to do is style the image itself. So the image, I'm going to give it a width of 400 pixel, right? So as you can see, the width of the image is the same as the width of the container. It was bigger before. As you can see, if I remove this, it was much bigger. And as you can see, the overflow hidden now has its effect. But regardless, I'm going to make it so that the width of the image is the same as the width of the container. The next thing I want to do is I want to make it a little bit bigger using transform, right? Transform scale 1.4. So now the image is bigger. And then finally, I want to define an animation that sort of takes this scale 1.4 as its initial, value, and then ultimately after the animation is done, I want to reset the scale to 1, right? So let's go ahead and create the animation itself. So I'm just going to say keyframes. I'm just going to call it reveal. On 50%, I still want the transform scale to be 1.4, which is the initial transform scale that I added. Um, and also I want the opacity to be 1. And then on the 100%, what I want to do is I want to make sure that the transform scale becomes 1, and then opacity would be 1 as well. Just like that. Um, The most important thing here is that initially I want to make sure that the opacity is 0. So opacity 0. So nothing is visible. And then here, as you can see, I want to preserve this opacity 0. So until 50%, I want to make sure that the transform scale is the same, 1.4, but the opacity is also 0. And then on 51%, suddenly in a short amount of time, I just changed the opacity from 0 to 1, meaning that by the half of the animation time, you're gonna see the opacity to be 1 and then the scale to be from 1.4 to 1. So basically, the actual animations happens in the middle. Right, so now if I go ahead and add this, so if I go ahead and say animation reveal, let's say 3 seconds. I'm just going to correct it. Reveal 3 seconds. You start to see the animation, right? So if I also say animation fill mode to be forwards, you'll see that if I save this, you'll see that you have this very cool sort of zoom effect animation that happens on the image. Just like that. The next thing we want to add is the overlays, right? So now that we have an idea of how things look like, I'm going to go to this view, and then here I will define the overlays. So the overlays will have position absolute, top will be 0, left will be 0, and then I will make sure that the width is 100% and height is 100%. And then make sure that the display is flex, and flex direction is column. The reason is that we are putting two overlays, one here on top half, and another here, right? We can use flex for that reason. I'm making sure that the flex direction is column. The next thing I want to do is to style the overlays themselves. So here I can say overlay. I'll give it a background of FFF, and then I'm just going to make sure that the flex is 1, and then animation, since we're going to animate these, animation fill mode to be forwards. The reason to put this is because I want to, when I animate these, I want them to stay at the ending state of the animation rather than resetting to their original styles, right? So now it's pretty easy. What I'm going to do, I first need to define um, a animation. So I'm going to say keyframes, I'll call it overlay 1, and then here what I can do is say from 0% I want the overlay 1, I want the transform to be scale X 0. By the way, part of these keyframes, I've already discussed this in the previous tutorial, so this should be pretty familiar if you have watched the previous tutorial. So what I'm trying to do is playing with the scale X and also transform origin to achieve the effect that I showed you. So initially I want the scale to be 0 and I want the transform origin to be 100% and 50%. And this is for the top box. Um, and then what I would like to do is on 50%, I want to preserve these values, but what I would like to do is change this 100% to be 0%. So basically it starts moving. Uh, uh, Sorry, I need to keep this 100% and 1, meaning that I need to move it. So basically on 0, the scale is 0 and the transform origin is 100% and 50. So imagining that this is our box, the transform origin is on the right side, and then I set the scale to 1 so that it starts the animation, right? The next thing I would like to do is on 51%, I want to make sure that the transform scale x1 will remain, but I would change the transform origin to be 0% and 50%, right? Um, and then finally, on 100%, I want to hide the overlay, basically setting the scale to 0. So scale X to 0, and then transform origin will be 0% and 50%, the same that we had over here. So now it's as easy as I can just go ahead and say overlay here. I can say overlay nth child 1. I want to make sure that the transform scale x is initially 0, and then transform origin is 100% and 50%, and then I want to make sure that the animation now is overlay 1, let's say 3 seconds, and ease in out, right? Just like that. Now you can see the top part actually having that animation, right? So it goes again, just like that. The next thing I want to do is do the same thing, but for the box that is going to be under here with the opposite direction of the movement, right? So here I can define another overlay. I'm just going to copy this and call it overlay 2. Here, the only change I need to do is changing the transform origins. Instead of 100, it should start from 0. And the same here, it should start from 0. And then ultimately these should be 100. So this basically reverses the animation that we have. And ultimately what we need to do is here, when we have defined this, I can copy the overlay nth child 1, I can make it nth child 2, right? And then change this to be 2, right? So you get this kind of animation as well. The most important thing is here, we also want to make sure that the transform origin is 0, right? So now if I save and restart it, you'll see that we get this cool overlay animation. This is pretty useful when you're designing websites that you want to reveal images or content based on, where your scroll bar is, or, you want to show some information that you want it to be sticky so that users take attention. This is another way of creating these cool animation. I personally like this one a lot because it has many effects, both overlays, animations, and also zooming. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do. And I hope you a best day and night. See you next time. Goodbye.